Okay, this is supposed to be fun, but as Jari said earlier, if there's a problem with IoT, this pointer is pointing at them. We're the problem. And so it's not a technical problem, because that guy right there, that's a Tesla, that's some fake rocket man, and it's going to fly around the galaxy for 1 million or so miles. And I actually have a project that's in there that I've worked on the last couple of years that went up this morning. So I've been up most of the night sort of thinking about this stuff and watching it and sort of being pleased of what autonomous IoT is doing. But the reason that I think it's working is because somebody knows how to tell stories. The problem with us nerds, how many people in this room took a class on telling stories with third-order differential equations? Anybody? Nobody. Nobody learned to tell stories in here in their logic class, in their coding class, or when they're hanging around figuring out what ADA or assembly was. So let's sort of jump into assuring your IoT objectives are funded by delivering business value. Because if you're not getting your stuff funded, if you're not doing autonomous stuff, it's your fault. Well, let's see if I can push the buttons. So I've never had a creative thought in my life. Everything I think and do is because I copied it from history, the web, coworkers, teachers, passengers, people on public transportation, and actually you, my wife, and kids. So that said, I've stole stuff from lots of people because that's my whole life, because I'm a technologist and that's what we do. So hopefully what we're going to cover here is a little bit about what business leaders are tasked with doing today, and it's near real-time value. And I didn't say real-time, it's near real-time value. And we don't need to get into what real-time is, because I don't think Microsoft Gold partners have any real-time operating systems yet. But that said, that's another topic. The harvesting of sensor IoT and double IoT requires solving three things. The three vectors associated with IoT. You got to have this carved into your skull: latency, interoperability, and cost. That's the only thing that people care about. The data-driven enterprise requires this notion of right data. We're all talking about big data. Let's talk a little bit about right data. Data that's sized for business value. Smart cities, connected cars, blah, 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 all require sustainability. Interoperability is the story that no one's talking about. We're going to talk about it. And your IoT project must deliver business value that's traceable to business strategy and outcomes. So that said, who am I? The only thing that's really interesting about me is I like modeling and simulation, enterprise architecture. I volunteer a little bit to do some standards work and screw around with rockets. And what else? I work for Vertica. And so what I do with Vertica is I help clients, folks like you around the world, to try and not help you fail, and if you do, to help you get fixed. And I live on a boat in Seattle, and I've raised 7 kids, and this is why I can travel all the time. So, that said, am I talking too fast, first off? I hope not. Everything that I've written down is actually, if you can read it, then it's probably better than listening to me. But we've moved on from the industrial age to the information age, and we're solidly in this digital age. And it's really not about hardware, is it? It's really about messing around with the data. So the gentleman earlier said something about, massaging the data and get it right. Well, 60 to 80% of the time we're screwing around with the data. So now we're into this digital mesh. And it's the beginnings of a cooperative, portable, interoperability ontology. I love that word, ontology. That's the data model at the thing of taxonomically, by vertical, organized, reusable, and valuable data. So we're going to be suffering through that for the next decade. And we're not going to be able to sell this stuff until we can explain what all those words were I just said. This is my definition. It's in a couple of manuals, so I think it's probably reasonable. At least the publisher said it was. The Internet of Things is a network of physical objects that contains embedded technology to communicate and sense or interact with the object's internal state or environment. Increasingly seen as autonomous. It's not a server. It's a sensor that has some fabric and storage or some level thereof that can think for itself increasingly. Increasingly, it's interoperable with other things. In fact, that's really the nature of this talk. If we can't figure out how to make our stuff interoperable, that your thing talks to your thing, this is going to fail. So there's consumer IoT, industrial IoT. I think that they're different. One of them lives in the space of OT. One of them is often in the IT space, a little bit lighter in duty. That said, I'm not going to play this, but you should go home and watch this because you'll get these slides. This is the Falcon flying last night. Is anyone not thrilled by this? Raise your hand, I need to talk to you. Okay, so is your IoT work traceable to business strategy? Well, first off, let's review how business works in 6 easy steps. So I'm not a business guy. I'm a nerd when it comes down to it. I'd rather code and look at numbers than get in front of a room and talk full of people. But this is how I think business works in my role as an enterprise architect. First off, is global events and drivers, things that are happening around the world. And executives take those and they write strategy. A strategy is simply a verb plus a noun plus some period of time and a percent up or down. That requires capabilities, typically human systems or machines, to solve that strategy. It requires an org chart that has human systems or machines in it, and that's assured by some level of governance that proves that the work was done or traceable to strategy sustained by a business. And if you can't do it, you improve the business, you sell it, or you shut it down. That's a business. Now the beauty of that story is this line here about governance. This is about IoT. Does that make sense to folks? It's in 6 lines. It's pretty easy. We probably ought to remember this one. So this traceability piece, this is about you telling your story about IoT. If you can't tell it, you're going to fail. And then I fail. Okay, so we just talked about what strategy is. What's value? How many people think value is money? Most of you should raise your hand. How many of you think it could be something else? It could be work. It could be a process. It could be a service. It could be a trade. Blockchain doesn't necessarily require that there's a valuable exchange of money. It could be ideas. So value has to be delivered. And so somebody's got to buy it. So an executive has to buy value. Most executives want what? They want money. They want the money. Most salespeople want the money. But we often have to deliver value. So what happens when you as technology leaders don't have access to business strategy? So it turns out that Gartner says 35% of businesses don't have business strategy. Can you imagine that? So I got to tell you that I'm surprised by this, but I find it in my work all the time. 2 weeks ago, I was in a town in the middle of Netherlands someplace. I'm dealing with a $5 million a year company, and I'm working with the executive team. And I said, could you show me your strategy? And they kept dancing. There's no strategy. And so how do you expose strategy? Well, let's run through how to do that. First off, capability modeling is a way to help your organization understand how you do work and how you contain it. And I'll get through it a little bit more about how that sort of works, how capability models work. But if you don't have business strategy, you as technologists have to figure out how to pry your business leaders into having it. So I'll show you how to do that. How many people use Archie? Anybody? Well, it's because you all have Visio. Okay, not everyone in the world has Visio or can afford it. So if you can't, and I have to work with everyone in the world, so lots of clients aren't Microsoft Gold clients. So if you go to this address, you can download this tool called Archie. It's actually in Finnish. I pulled up the Finnish page, but you can't read it. It looks like Greek, doesn't it? But if you go to that site, you can download the Finnish one. This is something that I put together for a client. When was that, Bert? Monday, I think it was. What day is this? Wednesday. Yeah. It took me about 30 minutes to put this together. I used an open standard. I used Archie. The rep told me what the client sort of wanted, and this is the story of OT, IT with some external cloud services with a real-time service bus with a number of ancient legacy capabilities. All of them have IT in it today. This took me about 30 minutes to put together, and you'll see on the far right, it says data lakes and real-time analytics. Who can guess what that is and why I'm here and who I work for? It's supposed to say this, that's Vertica. So the idea is this becomes Kafka, that becomes Vertica. So this took about 30 minutes to do in Archie. You can give this to your clients and let them use it or show them how to use it, and you get some value out of it likely. So capability models. Anyone ever do a capability model? Yoo-hoo! 10%. So capability models are pretty good things for technologists to know how to use because they're not technical. So if you're trying to explain from the bottom up, I've got a data model, I've got some little machine, some sensor that does some work. There's some higher box that goes around it. And it's just a noun. It's usually a noun with a verb. It could be something like maintain, report data. That's a reasonable capability to put a sensor inside of. What's higher than report data? Probably manufacture or install instance of IoT. What's higher than that? Probably develop IoT or develop machine. What's higher than that? Create products. What's higher than that? Sell products. What's higher than sell products? How about sell 5% more green tractors in Zamboanga in the next 12 months? That's a business strategy. I just created a capability model. So L0 lives where the executives live. Executives think about selling, marketing, services, partners, procurement. And I just picked this indiscriminately off Gartner. But this is the L0, this is L1. L1 takes that L0 capability, breaks it up into some boxes or components, and there's children of those. If you just pick on any one of those, you can imagine what the child is of that. You can imagine that with this client last week, I spent 2 days with him, they had a room full of data scientists, brilliant people and developers, and we did this and started from the bottom up and went up and forced the executives to give us strategy on the end of day 2. The executives weren't so thrilled by it, but yet they were, because it turns out the executives didn't really know what the nerds were doing. The nerds didn't really know what the executives were doing. So now they do. There's another model to consider is IT for IT. Anyone familiar with that? It's an open standard, opengroup.org. You can find that. At level 6 and 7, T-Mobile, Boeing's at level 6, T-Mobile's at level 5. They actually insert a value model or value chain. I'll show you a picture of it in a moment. Most of the time, IoT and its capabilities show up around L6 or 8. So it's going to take you 6 or 8 of those collections of boxes to get down to where you have data models. And I should mention as well that typically we'll have a traceability model. It's often just a 3-column Excel that has the name of the capability, some sample metrics, and you'll note that I've actually included one column, and I'll say sell, products, dev solutions, assemble solution, install solution, measure report, govern, maintain IoT. That's essentially the traceability model in one column. So it's a 3-column traceability model. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Okay, use stories to sell your IoT vision. Gotta tell stories, folks. Okay, here's how to tell a story. 5 steps. Know your message, find the right example, weave your narrative. In America, we'd say add some bullshit. Convey passion, support with facts. Pretty simple. You want a great story? I'm going to give you one. So this is the beginnings of your story. I say this is the finished story. I love this. There's this guy called Kevin Ashton, British guy. He claims he invented the IoT in 1999. Seems reasonable, but it's not. So this is where the story gets interesting. This is called irony. This gets people excited. In 1998, there's a Finnish guy. He's an educator, lives right down the street from us. He saw a need to track airport equipment in Helsinki. So he created some sensors and mapped the locations. Remember those trucks that have stairs on them? There apparently wasn't enough of those in 1998, 1998. He saw this need and did something about it. Put some sensors on it, mapped the locations. Life got better. Created 2 patterns. Those became standards. He donated those to the open standards community. Kerry Frambling, anybody know him? Teaches at Alta University. You should invite him over. He could do this talk better than me. Essentially, I called him this morning and showed him what I was delivering. He said, okay, say hi to everyone. So, great. So you got to tell a story. And if you tell a story like that, people become impassioned and join you. If I heard that there was an inventor, I'm going to pick on you, sir. Ernsto? Is that the name of the company? Okay. Okay. So I'm sorry my Finnish is so bad, but it doesn't exist. If you came with your story and preface with this, I'd be excited already, because we love an underdog. We love someone who goes out there in the world scene and sort of takes over. And the thing about Finnish culture I've used, you guys don't brag about stuff, you just do work. And Americans, we often brag about stuff and don't do anything, but talk about the size of our buttons, apparently. That's a joke. So this comes from the Biotope. So I got to be on the board, or am on the board of Biotope. It's Helsinki, Brussels, and Lyon. This is your smart city. Here's the address for it, biotope-h2020.eu. This is a story that we use to sell to get funding from the EU to get sensors in Helsinki, Brussels, and Lyon. Kind of cute. If you go to the website, you can read about it. Offline, we can talk about it. But you'll see bottle management for water, some weather data for deciding which streets to clean down, because you notice that the wind protects some of the streets and not others, so why send the snow shovels, the snow trucks down there? HVAC stuff, having kids not get run over by school buses and so on, crossing, so on, the Safe Journeys program. The beauty of these stories is once you get to tell this story, we tell other stories. So I use this story. In fact, the project manager that's with the EU that's in Helsinki flew down to Brussels a couple of weeks ago, and we met with Antwerp and Ghent, and we're going to use the same data model. Remember that thing I mentioned about interoperability? Can you imagine that 3 cities are using the same data model? Wouldn't that be wild? Okay, using roles in your user stories. So often it's difficult because you have an org chart and you don't know what those people do, but they have titles. Go to apqc.org. You can look up roles. It will give you the questions a role asks. I looked up again this morning to make sure I haven't lost my mind. There's 509 questions associated with the CIO. Your metrics should probably give the answers to those 509 questions, or your data someplace. Every role you can imagine is in there. Brain surgeons in there, they have 90 processes. Insurance settlement clerks have 35. Electrical engineers have 122. You can find those at apqc.org. And now you know how to model the questions and the answers that your sensors, your big data has to report. So it should be in your data store someplace. IoT capabilities have metrics. Yes. So a role personifies the capabilities. The reason we hired you, sir, is because you have a role that ties to some strategy. You're not around just to decorate the place because you look good. Roles personify the capabilities. Human systems and machine perform these roles. IoT existence. IoT should know if it exists or not. The thing about a light bulb that doesn't make it smart, it doesn't know if it's on or off. You feel it, it's hot. But an IoT instance of a thing should know if it's on or off and report its health, performance, and capacity. I claim those are the three kinds of metrics that every mature instance of IoT should demonstrate. IoT instantiation should report metrics associated with your intended use or capability, so you can map it back up to the role, map it to the org chart, map it to the capability, map it to what? The business strategy. Now you're starting to get the business of selling your IoT. So report to your organization the IoT capabilities you're deploying so that executives can all see this. Example, if you're manufacturing axle housings, you test. And note that I've gotten used to doing this. I have sort of verb plus noun object. Manufacture axle housings. Test material density using some IoT infrared sensors. Report material management. That's a nice capability model. It's actually traceable, isn't it? So if we all started talking like that, we could get our executives to do that as well, because our executives are selling for us. There's three levels of an executive: entrepreneurial, growth, and maintenance. Most executives are your chief salesperson. If they can't tell this story, who is? You've got to teach them to sell these stories. If you find that you don't have enough staff helping you develop IoT, whose fault is it? Point your finger at yourself. It's you, because you didn't tell these stories so they can recognize what you need. Okay, let's talk a little bit about data. This is sort of a horrible story. 5% of all the data that you're storing is not being being used for value. So let me give you some more. Data space. Let me buy you a petabyte of storage. Does that sound like a great idea? The executives are looking at that and say, no way. So imagine the potential for data savings if you would size your IoT projects for business value. Instead of having peds of data, you probably have terabytes of data. So you're going to see that these 50 ped organizations are going to start to figure out, how do I get value out of that data? How do I churn my data effectively so it's generating business value? Other thing I want to mention is, having watched data science teams for the last few years, it takes about 12 to 18 months to build an effective data analytics team. This doesn't happen overnight. You don't just hire some Joe and he shows up and knows how to do the work. Okay, use enterprise architecture principles. So I do enterprise architecture. Enterprise architecture is not solution architecture, is it? Enterprise architecture deals with the four domains of business, data, application, and technology, often called BDAT. Typically, there's an EA associated with each one of those roles. The chief enterprise architect has 4 enterprise architects: business, data, application, and technology, and there's generally 1 to 5 solution architects that live within that vertical. It's like a big happy family. In fact, as a chief enterprise architect, I claim that 80% of what I do is not technology, it's family counseling. It's just trying to get people to understand what's going on, what's happening with the left and the right hand. And so if you want to sell your projects well with an organization, find your EAs, make them your best friend, and let them help you sell, because they're pretty good at family counseling. This is why I have 7 kids and I'm an EA. So EAs often own the go-no-go decision on capital acquisition. And my job is about governance. When you're the dad in a family and you're doing family counseling, you get to own governance. You get to say who gets to play and who gets to stay. That's the way it's played. That's the way your organizations work. So use your EAs. There's models for doing it. I won't bore you, but TOGAF is the one that I mostly work with, but I do the other ones as well. The job of frameworks is to create roadmaps. Roadmaps include what? Your products, the stuff that you want to make. What else is interesting there? Most EAs don't report to the CIO. They report to the operating officer. 20 years ago, I reported to the CIO, then the CFO, who owned the CIO, and now these days, most EAs report to the OO. Maybe the FO, but the OO generally. And they generally keep you from getting money if you're in IT, because they govern the enterprise. That's what they do for a living. Okay, getting into more fun stuff. Use open standards in design. What's the difference between open standards and open source? Is that clear to everyone? Have you got that carved in your skull? Open standards means there's 500 of us in the room, all from different companies, all from different walks, cultures, and ecosystems around the planet. We get together and decide this is the best way to do a thing. Standards are usually written in the nominative text. They're boring to read. If you've ever read the Unix standard, I worked on it for years. It's not very fun to read, but it explains how to make a technical specification and trace it to an open standard. And lots of people can have implementations of it. Open source is code that you post online, and you can download it, compile, or link it yourself and at your own risk. An open standard is shared by lots of people. Open standards are safe. You like them. Why is this doing this? So IT for IT is an integration standard I mentioned earlier. You can tell what happens when I borrow a slide from someone else, can't you? So there's 23 boxes there. Those blue boxes are each capabilities. That's a value chain with 4 value streams. Get used to this, because if you're in development, you live in the second one, called requirements to deploy. That's where you're taking requirements and writing code. I have 10 minutes, I'm going to move faster. So strategy to portfolio, this is where EA often lives. Requirement to deploy, request to fulfill, this is where your service catalog is, and detect to correct is where you're fixing things that customers have problems with. And you can download that and use it. A few open standards that are about IoT. IoT metrics must assure lowest cost, least latency, and interoperability of heterogeneous things. Note the heterogeneous things. Lastly, you're going to wrap the IoT names and their supporting metrics and the capability to report that to the executive team. That's selling the story. And then you're going to report open standards used to brand your solution best of. Report those open standards, because that's the first step towards selling interoperability. And why open standards, I covered that earlier. Note those 3 clouds. What's the problem with those 3 clouds? See all those cool things? Those 3 clouds aren't talking to each other, are they? Sensor data is pushed to virtual real servers, that's cool. Data is collected in verticals, and those things can't talk to each other because they're in those clouds. So, we live in this world of systems of systems. This car contains hundreds of sensors. The Falcon contains hundreds of thousands of sensors. We live in a world of systems of systems. Now, if I took that picture from 2 slides ago, I put those systems there. I want them to talk to each other in those clouds. How do I do that? They have different data models, different ontologies. There are standards out there. These 2 were invented in Finland. The Open Message Interface, the Open Data Format, OMI and ODF, open standards. You can find those at opengroup.org. Open Platform 3 is an open platform that has interoperability between multiple ecosystems. Those platforms talk to each other horizontally. The idea is that the IT standards work within the open platform. You can find that again at opengroup.org. I'm going to skip a couple. And you can see how, you're going to get these slides, so you can see how these ODF and ODM and OMI work together. I hope to see some implementations here. So we're going to play a quick game. It's going to take a minute to do. If you look underneath your chairs, I put a box from Amazon. No one's looking. You don't believe me. Okay, the way this game works, I think there's about 50 people in the room. I'm going to give you this little controller that I got off Amazon. It's 39 bucks, and you're going to make this little weather station. It does temperature, relative humidity and pressure, date timestamp every minute, and says the name of your box. You're each going to do that. I'm going to give you 10,000 bucks. I'm going to collect all those on Friday. So on Friday, you give it to me. Here's the problem. It's 50 of you. How many different data models do I get? Yell it out. 50. How many do I want? See the problem? Give me back my money. This is what's going to happen next in this IoT space, because no one wants to put up with 60 to 80% of their time massaging the data in order to make it cloud ready to make it interoperable. That's the problem. The way we fix that is common ontologies. It means working with your friends. Today, no one wants to work with their friends because hardware vendors are making 30% margins on hardware. Who's ever heard of such a thing? And that will continue for the next couple of years until finally consumers get tired of it. Most common IoT plays, I'll cover this really quickly. Event correlation. This is essentially using a column store or a data store to put all your metrics that IoT is collecting all across the enterprise. And now you're correlating them together rather than correlating them as individual systems. That's a big play that I see a lot. The other one is predictive maintenance, minimizing the cost of operations. Great. It's also about maximizing life. This guy with the awesome beard right there, Aubrey de Grey, essentially tells the IoT story from the healthcare perspective. If you go to McDonald's, you're not going to live very long. Remember that. So the idea is that he's looking at life and trying to extend it by looking at the value chain and using sensors in your body and in your food landscape to try to figure out how to keep you alive. I've gifted you a couple of these models. Essentially, these are functional architectures that I use, starting from strategy and going all the way down to, in this case, it's an OT environment with data historians, MES, SCADAs, and so on. And you're welcome to just have them. If you don't like them in this format, you'll send me a note and I'll give it to you in Visio, since you guys like Visio. Here's one with data aggregation inset that does machine learning. You can just superimpose your product names on top of them. This is a functional architecture. Okay, lastly, putting it all together, using enterprise architecture to help you with roadmaps, to help you sell, to help you do family counseling, to sell your IoT as a sort of a plan of attack. And time to value is critical. So that write data over big data, would you rather look for records through a petabyte of data or through a terabyte of data? Okay, blockchain. No discussion is complete without blockchain. Why should you care? Let's go to the bottom. Is Bitcoin, I crossed this out this morning, is Bitcoin a $10,000 fad or a $5,000 fad? Well, tonight it'll probably be a $1,000 fad. But that's Bitcoin, but that's not blockchain. So blockchain is a cool way of writing a transaction that's publicly aware. And the beauty of it is you can use that in your IoT transactions. So there's a big airplane company that's not European that happens to live in Seattle, and you know who that is. And so I go there every 6 weeks, and these days I'm working with IT for IT and blockchain. Because if they want to buy a cup of bolts from some little company in Helsinki, and it was packaged by Jan, that's not a good Finnish name, is it? By Jerry. Okay. Jerry packages them up. When they open them up to plug those bolts into that wing in Seattle, they expect that the Jerry bolt didn't get messed with along the way. The blockchain is a mechanism for doing that. Consider using your blockchain in about everything you're doing. I can't imagine an instance of IoT where blockchain is not part of it, in fact. I just think it's a great story, especially for unlocking Africa. There's 14% of the world lives on less than $2 a day. 2 billion people in the world don't have a bank account. That's a pretty big market. Alibaba's funding a lot this notion of microfinance, and they've now opened an initiative with the open source community to do nanofinance, borrowing $1 to $5, and trying to speed up that transaction. What are the three vectors? Cost, latency, and interoperability. That latency piece, if you're in Western China and the server's in Shanghai, you're not going to wait 10 seconds, are you? The Alibaba cloud's fast. It needs to be faster. It means that we need to figure out how to do the transactions locally by having 3 of your social scores saying that Don is worth $1 and I'll lend it to you right now, and then send that completed transaction with a bucket of bolts that I can buy from someplace in Shanghai. So I think the blockchain should be part of our story. Summary: assure cost, latency, and interoperability. Tell stories. Use EA and capability modeling. Use open standards. Model reference architectures, and then just repeat it over and over again until you get it right. Blockchain, consider that. And of course, use Vertica for big, narrow data and support EPQCorg in doing that. So thanks very much. You have questions? I see some are showing up. Not yet? Good. Okay, that's it. Thanks very much.